Hey everyone, brace yourself. Tonight, we're venturing into the coldest, most isolated corners where snowstorms hide terrifying secrets. These are true stories of people caught in the merciless grip of winter, facing fear you can almost feel crawling up your spine. Make sure to hit subscribe, smash that like button, and share this with anyone brave enough to watch. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see who dares to listen. Now, let's step into the storm. I remember that day like it was etched into my skin, every detail sharpened by fear. I had set out early, determined to make the hike before the first winter storms could fully settle in the Appalachians. The sky had been a dull gray, threatening but not enough to make me turn back. By noon, though, the clouds thickened and a cold, biting wind swept through the trees, rattling branches like skeletal fingers. I tried to keep my pace steady, thinking the snow would wait for me, but then it started. First light flurries, almost playful, then heavier, faster, until the trail I'd been following was nothing more than a white blur. Within minutes, every marker, every twist in the path vanished under a blinding sheet of snow. I stopped, trying to orient myself, and that's when I noticed the sound, soft, almost like whispers. But the wind carried it in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the storm playing tricks. But it wasn't just the storm. I turned back the way I thought I had come, but every direction looked identical, trees bending under snow, shadows forming in shapes my mind didn't want to acknowledge. The trail was gone, buried beneath a layer so thick I couldn't even see the roots or rocks that had once guided me. Panic began to creep in, not sudden, but like water seeping into a basement. I whispered my own name, hoping the sound would anchor me, but the wind swallowed it immediately, scattering it into nothing. And then I heard it again, the whispering, clearer this time, though still too soft to understand, almost pleading, almost accusing. I began to run blindly, branches lashing my face, snow soaking through my jacket, until I stumbled over something solid. It was the cabin. I hadn't seen it on any map, hadn't known there was one in this part of the forest. But there it was, crooked and ancient, its timbers gray with rot and frost. The door hung slightly open, moving with the wind, creaking as if it were breathing. I hesitated, my hands trembling, my teeth chattering, and yet something, a desperate need for shelter, pushed me forward. Inside, the air hit me like a wall. It was colder than the storm outside, sharper somehow, and it smelled faintly of decay and old smoke. The floorboards groaned under my weight, the sound echoing in the empty, hollow room. I tried to convince myself I was alone, that there was nothing here but the wind and my own imagination. Yet the shadows seemed wrong. They moved in the corners where light didn't reach, stretching and shrinking with a life of their own. I called out once, twice, my voice cracking, but it disappeared into the cabin as though it had never existed. I explored the room slowly, touching the walls, looking for any sign of another living soul. That's when I noticed the markings. Scratches, deep and uneven, etched into the wood of the walls and the frame of the door. They weren't old, not entirely. The wood was raw beneath the scratches, exposed like a wound. My stomach knotted, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. Someone, or something, had been here. Possibly recently. And yet, there was no sound, no movement to confirm it, only the wind outside, howling through broken windows, and the whispers that now seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was animals, raccoons or foxes seeking shelter, but the sound didn't fit that explanation. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost intelligent. I found a corner and pressed my back against the wall, trying to conserve heat, trying to convince myself that dawn would come soon, that someone would find me if I didn't make a mistake. The storm outside intensified. Snow pelted the roof with a relentless fury, making the cabin groan and sway. Every gust sounded like a footstep on the floorboards above me, even though the ceiling sagged empty. I couldn't tell if the whispers were moving, circling me, or if my mind was unraveling, playing tricks in the dim light. Shadows shifted. Something scratched at the floor in the far corner. Soft but distinct. I froze, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door seemed farther away than when I entered, as if the cabin itself had stretched in the dark. Hours passed. I don't know how many, only that time felt liquid, slow and oppressive, each second measured by the storm's rhythm. I tried to keep my mind occupied, counting floorboards, examining the scratches, but the more I looked, the more details emerged. Finger-like marks dragged across surfaces, smears in the dust that weren't there before. At one point, I thought I saw a figure in the corner, hunched low, motionless. When I blinked, it was gone. My chest ached from holding my breath. I spoke again, asking if anyone was there, and this time, the whisper answered. Not words, but a sound that mimicked my own voice, echoing back, distorted, unnerving. Sleep didn't come. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing movement in the shadows, feeling a presence close enough to touch but never revealed. The storm raged on, a merciless chorus of wind and snow. I could hear it pounding against the walls, as though trying to break in, and sometimes I thought the cabin itself was groaning in protest, like it resented my intrusion. Hunger, cold, and exhaustion warped my thoughts. I felt small, insignificant, completely alone yet watched, a contradiction that gnawed at my sanity. Every instinct told me to leave, but every step I took toward the door felt like walking through molasses. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the frost-covered windows, I was trembling uncontrollably. The storm had subsided slightly, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. Snow covered every sign of the trail outside. I couldn't even see where the cabin ended and the forest began. I dared to step outside, hoping the daylight would guide me, but the whispering followed me, faint now, almost apologetic, lingering like mist around my ears. I looked back at the cabin, half expecting it to disappear, and for a moment I swore I saw a shadow in the doorway, crouched and still, watching me. My stomach dropped, and I ran without looking back, the snow crunching under my boots, my breath loud in my ears. It took hours to find the road, to see signs of civilization again, and even then, the forest seemed alive, holding its secrets tightly. I haven't been back since. I don't know if anyone else has ever entered that cabin, or if the markings I saw were left by someone human, or something else entirely. Every winter, when the first snow falls, I think about the whispers, the shadows, the sense of eyes pressing against me from the darkness. And every winter, I feel that same cold dread creeping back into my chest, reminding me that some places are meant to be avoided and some storms are meant to be survived only by those who flee. I can't explain it rationally. Logic fails when the forest grows silent, except for the wind and those faint, impossible sounds. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, that exhaustion and cold, warped reality, but I remember the scratches, fresh in my mind, raw as if they could still bleed. I remember the way the shadows moved, deliberate and patient, waiting for something I wasn't ready to give. And I remember the way the storm seemed to isolate me, to fold the world in on itself until I was nothing but fear, alone with the unseen. Even now, I can't forget the cabin, can't forget the way it felt to know I was not entirely alone, even when no one or nothing was visible. That memory follows me, silent and persistent, whispering in the corners of my mind, a reminder that the forest keeps its secrets, and sometimes it waits. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't venture far into the mountains without company, and I never, ever forget the sound of snow whispering in the trees, the wind carrying voices just beyond hearing, the way a cabin can hide more than shelter. Some nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear those whispers again, faint but unmistakable, calling my name in a tone that makes my skin crawl. I tell myself it's the storm, that it's nothing more. But I know better. Some places never let you go. Some nights, they remember you long after you've left. I'd been hiking alone that afternoon, taking a familiar trail I'd walked dozens of times, but the way the forest looked under a thick layer of fresh snow made everything feel different. Hollow, almost fragile, like it could shatter under the wrong step. At first, the snow was light, almost playful, dusting the pine boughs and crunching quietly beneath my boots. By the time I reached the ridge, though, the wind had picked up, sharp and biting, and the clouds were lowering fast, choking the sun out of the sky. That's when I noticed them, footprints pressed deep into the fresh snow. My first thought was relief. I wasn't entirely alone, someone had passed through recently. But as I stepped closer, trying to see where the tracks led, a creeping sense of unease crawled up my spine. They weren't moving away from the trailhead. They were moving in a pattern that didn't make sense, like someone had wandered without direction, then doubled back, circling closer to me. I tried following the tracks, hoping to catch sight of another hiker, a familiar figure maybe, but the snow seemed to swallow everything beyond a few feet. Every time I thought I was getting close to their path, the prints ended and then reappeared a few steps ahead, impossibly repositioned. My boots sank into the soft powder as I shuffled forward, heart hammering, trying to make sense of the impossible geometry. The forest around me seemed to bend with the wind, the pines groaning under the weight of ice and snow. I told myself it was just fatigue or imagination playing tricks. Yet, even as I thought that, a whisper of movement in the peripheral shadows made me freeze, the chill of the wind suddenly sharp against my throat. The snowstorm grew aggressive. What had been a gentle dusting turned into a blizzard, the flakes stinging my cheeks, plastering itself to my eyelashes. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the footprints I'd been trying to follow dissolved into the white chaos. I stopped, fumbling with my pack for the small compass I carried, but the needle wavered uselessly under the magnetic pull of the mountains. That's when it started, the faintest sound, carried over the howl of wind, like slow, deliberate breathing. I spun, trying to pinpoint it, but the whiteout swallowed everything beyond a few paces. Every instinct told me to move, to get back to shelter, but my feet seemed to stick, almost as if the snow itself had turned to glue. I stumbled over something buried just beneath the surface. My hands flew forward to catch myself, and I recoiled instantly. Half buried in the snow was the body of a deer, frozen solid, its neck twisted at a grotesque angle, but its eyes, wide, unblinking, staring, felt alive, accusatory, almost. My stomach turned, but what made me shiver uncontrollably wasn't the deer itself. It was the pattern of the tracks. They led away from the body, not toward it, as if whoever or whatever had left them had circled back to check, feeding or toying in some way I couldn't understand. My rational mind screamed that it had to be a scavenger, maybe a pack of coyotes, but the spacing and the looping of the tracks made no sense for any wild animal I knew. The breathing returned, slow, deliberate, echoing in my skull more than the air. I couldn't tell if it was behind me or beside me, or if my mind had begun to turn the wind into sound. I started running, trying to make for the last recognizable trail marker I had passed, but the storm had transformed everything into an undifferentiated blur. Snow piled up faster than I could kick through it, and each step was a struggle. My lungs burned, and the cold cut deep, a sharp ache that made my teeth chatter. The forest seemed to close in, branches clawing at my jacket and hair, every snap of a twig making my heart leap. I tripped again, hard, face first, into the snow. My fingers scraped over something icy, but I forced myself to keep moving, adrenaline and terror overriding pain. The footprints had been guiding me, or mocking me. I couldn't decide which. There was no rhyme or reason to their path. Sometimes they veered into deep drifts, sometimes into clearings that seemed impossibly exposed to the storm. I felt like my entire world had shrunk to the space between my own boots and the vague impression of tracks ahead. And all the while, the sound of that slow breathing followed, never gaining or losing pace. Just there, a presence without shape. Hours, or maybe minutes, I lost track of time, passed in that endless white. My eyes burned from the cold, and my mind began to unravel, imagining faces in the snow, shadows where there were none. And then, abruptly, I stumbled into a narrow crevice cutting through the mountainside, jagged rock on either side rising higher than I could see in the storm. I stopped, gasping, the tracks ending in front of me as if drawn by a deliberate hand. There was no continuation, no escape, and for a long moment the world was silent except for the wind screaming around the cliffs. The breathing too had vanished, or maybe it had been me, holding my breath, waiting, hoping for some explanation. I pressed myself against the rock, trying to catch my bearings. The snow swirled violently, and the storm seemed to focus around the crevice, the howling wind cutting a channel that made my ears ring. I looked down at the snow around my boots. No prints, nothing, not even mine. Once the drift swept over them, I felt utterly unmoored, as if the mountains themselves had decided I didn't belong. Then I saw it, something subtle at first. The pattern of snow along the ledge, a shallow disturbance in the accumulation that seemed impossibly intentional. I couldn't see much, but my gut told me it wasn't the wind. The tracks hadn't returned, but the sense of being observed had. It was deeper than fear. It was the kind of awareness that doesn't belong to a creature exactly, but to the forest itself, or maybe to something that had learned to move through it unseen. Hours passed, or minutes, but I never stopped shivering, crouched in that crevice, listening. The storm eventually began to fade, or maybe I just ceased noticing it, too drained to distinguish between the noise outside and the terror inside my own head. When I finally worked up the courage to leave the small shelter the crevice provided, I realized the world looked untouched, impossibly pristine. The tracks were gone, as if they had never existed, and the snow covering the deer had smoothed over into a featureless white. My heart still thumped wildly, each step echoing in my ears. I stumbled back toward the trailhead, not daring to glance behind me, though the feeling never left. I told myself it had been exhaustion, a snow-induced delirium, maybe even the clever weaving of my mind around the shapes in the forest. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. The footprints had been real. I had seen the deer, and I had felt it. Something following, watching, learning from me. I've tried to explain it to friends, even written it down in journals, but it never comes out right. The memory of those looping tracks, the deliberate breathing, the deer with eyes too alive to belong to a corpse, it stays with me, and I can't shake it. Sometimes I still hike in those mountains, but never alone, never after fresh snow, and every so often when the wind is right and the forest seems too quiet. I swear I can hear it again. Slow, deliberate breathing, circling, patient, waiting for someone foolish enough to follow its trail. The tracks always lead away, but they always come back. And the silence afterward is worse than the storm itself. I remember the snowstorm like it was a living thing, roaring and clawing at the mountainside as I stumbled along that winding road. The wind bit through my jacket, and the powdery snow whipped into my face until I could barely see the road. let alone the trees lining it. I'd been driving all afternoon, trying to make it to the next town before nightfall, but the storm came out of nowhere, faster than anything I've ever seen. That's when I saw it. A small cabin, half hidden by the ridge, its roof barely visible under a thick blanket of snow. I'd passed it a few times before, never thinking much of it, but tonight, it was a lifeline. I turned off the road, tires crunching on frozen ruts, and made my way to the door. The cabin smelled before I even got all the way inside. A heavy, choking mix of mildew and decay that stuck to my clothes and hair. I remember thinking I should turn around, that it was too quiet, too empty. But the storm outside promised something worse if I stayed in the open. The cabin was dark, the only light coming through frost-lined windows. I pulled a chair close to the fireplace, hoping it still worked, and coaxed the flames to life with trembling hands. They sputtered and caught, and for the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of warmth, a small illusion of safety. I thought I was alone. I told myself that over and over, like a mantra. The first hour passed in silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the cabin settling under the weight of the snow. Then I noticed the curtain in the far corner, twisting just slightly, as if a breeze had caught it. There was no breeze, of course. The windows were shut tight, ice sealing the cracks. I froze, telling myself I was imagining things, that the storm outside was playing tricks on my eyes. But the twitching didn't stop. Shadows began to stretch along the walls, odd angles forming where the moonlight hit through the frost. I tried to shake it off. I tried to readjust my mind, focus on the fire, the warmth, the small comforts. But then I heard it. A footstep, soft, deliberate, pacing above me on the cabin's second floor. I wasn't even sure the cabin had a second floor. It seemed too small, but the sound was there, echoing in the wooden beams. I called out, my voice weak and drowned by the howl of the storm outside. Hello. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Nothing but the wind. The footsteps continued, slow and methodical, stopping only when I held my breath. Then the whispering started. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, like someone speaking from far away. My skin crawled. I leaned closer to the fire, trying to convince myself it was just the wind whistling through the cracks. But the words were real, low, deliberate. I couldn't make out what they were saying, just the cadence, the rhythm, like someone reciting something over and over. My stomach turned and I wanted to run, to escape into the storm, but the snow outside was knee-deep, and the dark road offered no comfort, only the certainty of being swallowed by the mountain. Hours passed. I don't know how many. Time lost all meaning. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the walls set my nerves on edge. I kept imagining faces at the windows, figures crouched in the corners, but every time I looked, the cabin remained empty. Yet I knew it wasn't. Something was there, watching, testing me. It felt alive in a way that a house shouldn't. The fire flickered and died once, leaving me in near darkness. That's when I felt it. The presence. Not a person, not exactly, but a pressure in the air, a weight that pressed against my chest and made it hard to breathe. I thought back to the stories I'd heard growing up. Tales of people who vanished in the mountains, cabins that were cursed, old families who went feral when winter trapped them. I'd always dismissed them as folklore, but sitting there in that rotting, abandoned cabin, I realized the stories might be rooted in truth. Maybe this cabin had a history, a life I could not understand, and I was now a part of it. I couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but I felt its gaze in every corner, every shadow. I tried to sleep, curling up near the fire, but the noises never stopped. Footsteps pacing above, whispers that moved around the walls, sometimes coming from the very floorboards beneath me. I counted them, tried to measure them, convinced myself I was going mad. The storm outside raged on, relentless, and the snow-banked windows turned the cabin into a tomb. Every sound was amplified, every creak a signal that something moved just out of reach. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something sour, like old sweat or blood. I couldn't place it, and I didn't want to. At some point I realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk anything, hadn't moved except to shift closer to the fire. Hunger and fatigue blurred the edges of reality. I kept thinking I saw shapes moving in the corners of my eyes, crouched in the shadows where the light didn't reach. One time, I swear I saw someone, or something, look at me from the loft. Just a flicker of a face in the gloom, gone before I could focus. My heart hammering, I whispered, "I'm not here to hurt you. I won't hurt you." Of course, there was no answer, only the storm, the creaks, the whispering. Morning never came in the way I expected. The storm didn't let up. The snow was a solid wall outside, turning the world into a white void. I pressed my face to the window, hoping to see the road, to find a sign of civilization, but there was nothing. I considered leaving, climbing through the snow, but the thought of moving through that blizzard with whatever was in the cabin behind me made me freeze. I understood then, in a way I can't fully describe, that the cabin had decided I was part of its story now. By midday, or what I assumed was midday, the noises had stopped, or maybe I'd stopped noticing them. The fire was nothing but embers, and the cold crept in again, wrapping around me like a second skin. I sat there, counting the cracks in the floor, watching the shadows twist and stretch. The cabin smelled of decay and old wood and something else. Something I couldn't name but knew was not human. I could feel it in my bones, a presence patient and calculating. Not angry, not necessarily malicious, but fully aware of me and perfectly content to let me sit there, waiting, watching, terrified. I don't remember leaving. I woke later, or maybe hours later, shivering in my car on the other side of the ridge, the snowstorm finally letting up. I drove in silence, eyes darting to the road. But I couldn't shake the memory of the cabin, of the whispers and footsteps, of the pressure that had pressed against me until I thought I might break. I kept telling myself I imagined it all, that I was tired and cold and alone. But I can't, because even now I feel it sometimes, that same weight pressing just at the edge of my awareness, reminding me that some places are not meant to be found, that some cabins are alive in ways we cannot understand, and that I was lucky to leave with my sanity mostly intact. I don't know who or what was in that cabin. I don't know if it was a person hiding from the world, a family long gone feral in isolation, or something else entirely. All I know is the feeling it left behind, the way it lingered in the pit of my stomach for weeks afterward. The world outside that storm felt ordinary again. But every creak in my own house, every shadow in the corner of a room, brings me back to that cabin. I still think about it at night, especially when the wind howls and the snow falls, because I know, deep down, it's still there. Watching, waiting, patient. Even now, I can't explain why I went inside, why I didn't just keep driving, why I ignored every instinct screaming at me. Maybe it was desperation, maybe curiosity, maybe something else. All I know is that in that cabin, surrounded by snow and shadow and whispers, I felt a fear I can't name, a dread that didn't end when the storm did, a presence that followed me into daylight. And I know, somehow, that cabin is still out there, and if the snow ever covers the mountains again, I, or someone else, might hear it calling. I didn't plan on being out there as long as I was. The weather report that morning said light snow, nothing serious, and I'd lived near those mountains long enough to know when forecasts were exaggerating. Late winter hikes were usually quiet, almost peaceful, the kind of solitude that made you feel like you were borrowing time from the land. The trailhead was empty when I parked. Just my truck and a thin layer of frost on the windshield, the forest ahead standing dark and bare like it was holding its breath. The first hour passed without trouble. Snow drifted down in soft flakes, more like ash than anything dangerous. The trees were skeletal, branches bowed under old ice, and the trail was a pale ribbon winding between them. I remember thinking how soundless it all felt, like the woods were padded. My boots crunched loud enough to feel rude, and every breath fogged thick in front of my face. I told myself that if the snow picked up, I'd turn back early. I didn't want to test my luck. That was before I noticed the eyes. I'd just rounded a bend where the trail narrowed, the forest pressing in close on both sides, when something caught the beam of my headlamp. 2 points of pale light, low to the ground, about 30 yards off the trail. At first, I honestly thought it was ice catching the glow just right. It happens more than people think, reflections off frozen bark or snow crust. I stopped walking and tilted my head, waiting for the illusion to break. It didn't. The point stayed there, level and fixed, not blinking, not shifting. When I took a step forward, they slid with me, keeping the same distance, same height. My stomach tightened in that quiet way it does when your body knows something before your mind is ready to admit it. I whispered out loud, "Deer," even though deer eyes don't usually sit that low unless they're crouched, and they sure don't track you like that. I stood still for a long moment, listening. The forest gave me nothing back. No wind in the branches, no bird calls, no scurry of animals. Just the faint hiss of snow falling and the dull thump of my heart in my ears. When I shifted my weight, the eyes shifted too, always staying just far enough into the trees that I couldn't see a shape behind them. I tried to reason with myself. Predators usually bolt when they notice a human. Even mountain lions tend to disappear once they know they've been spotted. But this thing, whatever it was, didn't act like anything I'd learned to expect. It watched with a patience that felt deliberate, almost thoughtful. The snow began to thicken, flakes growing larger, heavier. Visibility dropped fast, and the beam of my headlamp started to feel small, like it was being swallowed by the white. I told myself to keep moving, that standing there was worse than pushing on. As I walked, I angled my light away from the eyes, pretending not to notice them, like that might somehow make me less interesting. They followed, not rushing, not lagging behind, just there, always there. I tried ducking behind a cluster of snow-laden spruce, stepping off the trail and crouching low, holding my breath. For a few seconds, I convinced myself I'd lost them. Then the storm shifted, wind gusting hard enough to strip powder off the branches and send it swirling through the air. In that sudden chaos of white, the eyes appeared again, closer this time, glinting through the moving snow like embers. My mouth went dry. I could smell myself, sharp and human, carried by the wind straight into the trees. Every instinct screamed that I was being hunted, but not in the clean, honest way an animal hunts. This felt personal, observant, like something was learning me. The trail markers were getting harder to see, half buried now, and I realized with a cold shock that I'd let myself wander farther than I should have. Turning back meant retracing my steps through whatever was stalking me. Going forward meant unknown terrain and worsening weather. I chose forward, mostly because my legs refused to turn around. The howls started then, far off and warped by the storm. Wolves, maybe, or coyotes, but the sound didn't settle right in my chest. It rose and fell too slowly, stretched thin by distance and snow, like the mountains themselves were making the noise. Each howl seemed to echo longer than it should, overlapping with the next until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. The eyes stayed silent. At one point, I stumbled over a root hidden under fresh snow and went down hard. The breath knocked out of me in a sharp burst, pain flaring in my knee. As I scrambled to my feet, panic spiking, I swung my headlamp wildly through the trees, desperate to finally see a body attached to that gaze. I saw nothing. No fur, no outline, no movement. Just the eyes, steady and unblinking, now close enough that I could see they weren't reflecting white like an animal's. They were dull, yellowed, like old glass held up to a weak bulb. I backed away, nearly tripping again. And that's when I felt it. Not a touch, but a pressure, like someone standing just behind me, close enough that the heat of them would have been noticeable if there was any warmth left in the air. I spun around, shouting, my voice cracking and thin, and found only snow and trees and my own footprints filling in behind me. The storm grew teeth after that. Wind howled through the branches, and the snow came sideways, stinging my face. My world shrank to a tunnel of white and shadow. The trail vanished entirely, erased under drifts, and I started following what I hoped was the slope leading down toward the road. Every step felt wrong, like I was being gently guided off course. The eyes flickered in and out of view, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes to the side. Once, God help me, behind me, reflected faintly in the ice-slick bark of a tree I passed. I stopped, trying to understand how that was possible. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the faint outline of the trail's edge near the parking area, relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. I stumbled forward, half running, half falling, and when I turned back one last time, the eyes were gone. No sound followed me out. No shapes moved in the snow. Just the storm, already starting to ease, like it had done what it came to do. I drove home in a daze, heater blasting, hands shaking so badly I had to pull over once just to breathe. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fear and weather had twisted something ordinary into a nightmare. People survive worse in those mountains every year. But the thing is, storms still bother me now, even gentle ones. When snow starts to fall and the world goes quiet, I catch myself staring into the distance, into dark corners where light doesn't quite reach. Sometimes, just for a second, I swear I see that same dull yellow glint watching from far away, patient as ever. And I know deep down that whatever it was didn't lose me in that blizzard. It just let me go. I set out that morning thinking I could make it through the mountain pass before the storm really hit. Just a few hours of walking and I'd be on the other side, back to the road and warmth. The sun was pale, hiding behind a thin layer of clouds that promised snow, but I didn't give it much thought. I packed my pack tightly, checked my compass, and started up the ridge, the air already tasting of ice and pine. At first, the trail was clear, a narrow line carved through the scrub and frozen soil, and I told myself I had plenty of time. But by mid-morning, snowflakes had begun to fall in earnest. Little flecks at first, then thick sheets that coated my boots and weighed down the pines. Soon, the path was gone, swallowed beneath white, and the forest around me seemed to fold in on itself, turning familiar ridges and gullies into an endless blur of gray and white. By the time noon rolled around, I realized I'd lost all sense of direction. My compass spun like a toy in a child's hands, pointing to every direction at once, and the landmarks I relied on, the jagged rock that looked like a leaning man, the twisted pine near the creek, were gone, buried or distorted by the snow. Every step I took sank into powder up to my shins, and the wind whipped around me, dragging loose branches across the snow and erasing every footprint I left behind. I tried to follow my tracks, hoping to trace them back, but the storm was relentless. Relentless in its quiet, patient way. The world had shrunk to the white that closed in from every side and the gray sky above. The only sounds the moaning wind and the occasional snap of ice somewhere unseen. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes and centuries at once, and I began to notice the patterns repeating. A low rock, a bent tree, a snowdrift piled just so. They showed up again and again. I stopped, shivering, chest heaving, and realized I'd been walking in circles. Panic clung to my throat. I turned this way and that, tried heading toward the ridge, toward the slope I thought might be the pass, but each turn seemed to land me back where I started. I shouted into the wind, half expecting an answer, half expecting silence, and got nothing but the muffled howl that swallowed my voice immediately. Then I heard it, a crack, sharp and sudden, like ice splitting somewhere close by. My heart jumped, but I saw nothing. No tree snapping, no branch falling, just the sound echoing through the snow and trees. I froze, listening. But the wind drowned out everything else. Another crack, this one nearer. My mind started playing tricks. Every shadow in the whiteness seemed like a figure, a hunched shape just beyond my vision, and I started stepping faster, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever it was. I don't know how long I stumbled blindly, following instinct more than sense, until I found myself in a small clearing. The snow here was trampled, churned up by footprints that weren't mine. They led from the tree line into a dense thicket, disappearing completely under branches and snow. I shouldn't have followed them, but curiosity mixed with fear, and I crept forward, trying to make sense of them. That's when the feeling hit me, like the air itself had weight, watching me, following me. I turned sharply, expecting someone, something, and there was nothing, just the gray haze of snow drifting between the trunks. I called out, my voice small and trembling, and it was swallowed immediately by the storm. I started moving again, faster now, but every step seemed to echo back at me, a mocking rhythm in the white. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, cold burned through my layers of clothing, and yet I couldn't stop moving. Something was following. I knew it, patient, keeping its distance, never revealing itself. Night threatened to fall, though I had no idea what hour it was. The sky darkened to a uniform gray, and the snow changed texture, heavier, wetter, harder to push through. My legs screamed, every muscle screaming, and yet I kept walking because to stop meant I'd be easy prey, whatever might be out there. The footprints had vanished behind me, and I realized I'd been walking blindly for hours. I tried marking trees, carving into bark with my knife, but the snow coated every scratch before I could even finish. The forest became a maze of shapes that looked like doors, openings, something that might lead somewhere, but each one was a trap, and I kept turning back. The wind shifted, bringing a new sound, a low, dragging shuffle through the snow. Not fast, not frantic, deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint it. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, just a dark smear, gone if I looked directly. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though I hadn't seen any fire. Something about it was wrong, out of place. I turned in a slow circle, trying to spot the source, and the clearing behind me seemed to have grown smaller, closer, enclosing me. I could feel my skin crawling, a heat rising beneath layers of cold. My legs, stiff and numb, felt like lead, and I fell against a tree, panting, trying to force myself to think clearly. I thought of the stories I'd heard growing up. People getting lost in the back ridges, disappearing for days, only to be found frozen or never found at all. I had scoffed at them once, but the laughter had long since left me. I realized that in the snow, in the storm, the mountain could erase you, rewrite you into its landscape. And perhaps that's what it was trying to do to me now. Every tree looked like the one before, every slope the same slope. Every crack in the ice sounded like someone moving closer, closer yet never revealed. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt full of ice and fear, so I whispered a prayer instead, barely audible, and kept moving. Hours passed in a blur of white and cold. I stumbled over rocks, slid down shallow gullies, and always, always felt eyes on me. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed a hunched figure among the trees, too fast to track, gone the moment I blinked. I tried to remember my route, tried to orient myself, but nothing matched. I had no landmarks, no sun, no stars. Only the snow and the wind and the faint, impossible dragging steps somewhere nearby. I began to speak to myself, repeating directions and landmarks aloud, hoping to convince my mind I still had control. The snow swallowed my voice each time, and I knew it didn't matter. Finally, after what must have been hours, I came to a tree that leaned sharply, roots exposed like claws, snow hanging in heavy sheets from its branches. And there, in the snow beneath it, were fresh footprints, a cluster, close together, but no one in sight. They led into a copse of firs, and I realized I was at the edge of something, somewhere I didn't want to be. The dragging sound I'd heard before was back, closer, patient, deliberate, moving in tandem with me. I ran because running was all I could do, though it carried me nowhere. The snow refused to give up its secrets. The forest refused to open. Every step brought the same shapes, the same shadows, the same sense of being watched. By the time the darkness fully settled, the storm had not eased, and I was exhausted, freezing, hungry, and dizzy from walking in endless circles. I found a small depression in the snow and collapsed into it, curling up as best I could. The dragging continued, somewhere just out of sight, never stopping, and I listened to the wind and my own shallow breathing. Eventually, fatigue overcame terror, and I slept fitfully, waking to the same white, endless expanse, the footprints still fresh around me, but no one there. The storm never lifted, the mountain never released me. I don't know how long I wandered after that, hours or days, my mind splitting in the monotony of snow and shadow. When I finally stumbled out, if stumble out is even the right word, I was coated in frost, half-starved, trembling like a leaf in wind. The world beyond the trees was bright, the road clear, people moving and talking, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had been there with me in the white, patient, silent, waiting. And even now, when I close my eyes, I see the clearing, the prints, the same trees repeating endlessly, and I can still hear that dragging in the snow, just behind me, even when there's nothing at all. I never went back to that ridge, never will. The mountain doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. And sometimes, late at night, I hear a wind through the trees that reminds me of that storm, that clearing, and I wonder if it's still following, patient and silent, waiting for someone else to wander into its endless white. I remember thinking I could stay ahead of it, that if I kept moving along the ridgeline, I'd outrun the storm. The wind had been picking up since mid-afternoon, carrying with it the sharp, icy bite of winter and a deep, almost tangible silence that seemed to press against my ears. At first, it was just the whistle of the wind through the bare trees and the crunch of snow under my boots. Nothing unusual, but then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the trees. It was faint at first, almost beneath the roar of the storm, like a distant cry, high-pitched and hollow. I paused and listened, thinking it was some animal caught in the white, a coyote maybe, but it didn't sound right. The rhythm was deliberate, almost conversational, rising and falling like someone speaking in a language I didn't understand. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was my imagination that the storm was playing tricks on me. But the howls kept coming, weaving through the wind in a way that made me tense every muscle. Each time I stopped, they stopped, and when I moved again, they seemed to creep closer, just beyond the reach of my sight. My breath came in ragged bursts, fogging in the freezing air, and I realized my body was weakening faster than I expected. The cold seeped into my bones, and every step felt like dragging weights through deep snow. Still, I forced myself onward, telling myself the ridgeline was my best chance, the only path that might lead me out of the storm's grasp. The snow grew heavier, turning the forest into a blur of white and gray. I could barely make out the trail beneath my boots, but I kept to the ridge, clinging to the illusion of a path. And then I saw them. At first I thought it was just a trick of the wind and snow, shadows playing across the slope. But no, there were figures, 2, maybe 3, standing still on a distant rise. Their forms were indistinct, like they had been carved from the storm itself. But I knew they were human, or at least something human-shaped. They didn't move as I approached. I called out, my voice barely carrying over the howling wind, but they didn't answer, didn't flinch. They just stared, silent watchers, their gaze almost too heavy to bear. There was something wrong in the way they looked at me, a patience and stillness that no person could hold in a storm like this. I felt a chill beyond the cold, deep in my chest, and kept moving, telling myself that they were just people caught in the blizzard, just like me. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The howls never stopped. Sometimes they faded into the distance, almost polite, like they were giving me a moment's peace. And then they would surge back, closer, as though the storm itself were breathing through some other presence. My legs ached, my fingers were numb, and the ridgeline seemed to stretch endlessly. Every time I glanced back, I half expected to see the figures moving, closing in on me, but they stayed on the slopes, blending into the snow, just watching. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern I couldn't decipher. My mind kept returning to them, to the impossibility of standing so still in this weather, and yet not being part of it, not succumbing. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural, and fear settled deep in my stomach, heavy and unrelenting. As night fell, the storm became a living thing, shoving snow into my face and scratching at my eyes. I knew I wouldn't make it to the next ridge safely, and my body had no more fight in it. I found a fallen tree, half buried in snow, and crawled beneath it, curling up as small as I could. I kept my eyes open, though I knew I shouldn't have. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried the faintest echo of those howls. I told myself not to breathe too loudly, that if there were others out there, if those figures weren't just snow and shadow, they'd hear me. The cold seeped in, stealing heat and thought alike, and I felt a sinking dread that maybe the storm wasn't the only thing hunting me tonight. The hours were long and broken, punctuated by sounds I couldn't explain. Sometimes a branch would snap far off and I'd hold my breath, straining to hear over the storm. Other times, the howls seemed to change, shorter, sharper, closer, almost in response to my movements. I wanted to sleep, to close my eyes for even a moment, but I couldn't. The silence between the sounds was worse than the noise. It was heavy and expectant, like the forest itself was waiting for something to happen. I felt watched in a way I never had before, as though the ridge, the storm, and whatever else was out there were all conspiring to remind me how alone I truly was. Morning came, and what I could assume was morning under the gray-white canopy of the blizzard. I opened my eyes to the same endless white, the same oppressive cold. The snow had stopped falling, or at least the wind had died down enough for me to tell. I stumbled up from beneath the tree, stiff and aching, and peered across the slope. The figures were gone. Nothing but white. I thought I might be relieved, that the worst was behind me. But the absence of them felt heavier, somehow more oppressive than their presence. Their disappearance made the night feel like it had been more than a dream, more than a storm. It left a residue, a lingering certainty that what I had seen had followed me somehow, even if I couldn't see it now. I pressed on, moving downhill, following what I hoped was a real trail this time. My boots left prints in the fresh snow, yet every few minutes I'd glance back, half expecting to see shadows stretching across the ridges, waiting, patient. The forest was quiet now. but it was the kind of quiet that made me flinch at every branch and every whisper of wind. I began to notice small signs, footprints, maybe human, maybe not, half filled with snow. Places where the snow had been disturbed as though someone had knelt or crouched there, watching. I told myself it was just other hikers, hunters, someone who'd been stuck here before me. Yet the fear gnawed at me, persistent and logical. The ridge had been an easy choice, a line to follow in a storm, and somehow I had walked right past danger, or something worse, and lived to carry it with me. By the time I finally found the main trail, recognizable and solid underfoot, I felt the storm's memory in my bones. My hands were blue, my knees ached with frost, and every sound made me jump. But the images of those figures, standing still against the snow, lingered in my mind. Not just the shapes, but the feeling behind them, the patience, the quiet intelligence, the sense that they had been waiting for something, or perhaps for me. I didn't know what I expected to find when I returned later, whether it would be nothing or the same shadows staring silently at me from the slopes. I only knew that I could never forget that night, and I would never feel safe on a ridgeline in the mountains again. Even now, when I hear a blizzard howl through the hills, I find myself imagining those figures, the way the snow clung to their bodies, the way they watched without moving. It's a fear that sticks with you, not in sudden shocks or grotesque shapes, but in the quiet certainty that you are being observed, and that sometimes the watchers don't need to move to control the scene. They wait, they watch, and they make you feel the storm in ways the wind never could. I remember that night like it's burned into my memory, though I wish it weren't. The storm came fast, more sudden than anything I'd ever seen in the mountains. One moment the sky was dull gray, the next the wind was howling, carrying fine, stinging snow that cut through my jacket like knives. I'd been trying to make it to the old ranger cabin, but the trail disappeared almost immediately. Trees bent under the weight of the storm, branches snapping and crashing to the ground. I stumbled on, trying to keep my bearings, but the storm had stripped every landmark away. That's when I spotted it. A low rock overhang on the side of a hill, like nature had scooped out a hollow just big enough for a person to squeeze into. Desperation drove me there, and I crawled underneath, the wind lashing my face, the snow piling in like cold sand. Once inside the overhang, it was like stepping into a different world. The storm raged outside, but here it was, quieter, almost still. Only the occasional whistle of the wind through nearby pines reminded me of the chaos beyond. I crouched, hugging my knees, shivering, and realized I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The darkness was thick, almost physical, pressing against me. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, but then the shadows started moving. At first, it was subtle, a flicker at the edge of my vision, a shape stretching differently than the trees. But then, they began to move more deliberately, sliding across the rock walls, sometimes mirroring my own movements, other times darting in directions I hadn't moved, as if they had their own purpose. My heart started hammering, a steady, relentless thump that seemed louder than the storm itself. I whispered to myself over and over, telling myself it was just shadows, just tricks of the mind. But the wind carried my words away, scattering them into the blizzard, leaving me talking to the dark. Hours crawled by, and time began to warp. The storm outside made it impossible to know whether it had been minutes or hours. The shadows grew bolder, inching closer to where I huddled, stretching long and low along the rock, curling around the uneven surfaces like black smoke. Every so often, one would dart forward, closer than I thought possible, and vanish before I could even focus on it. I tried not to move, not to breathe too heavily, but the cold gnawed at me, numbing fingers and toes, making every shiver echo like a gunshot in the silence. I pressed myself deeper into the rock's cavity, trying to convince myself to sleep, to drift off and escape the tension, but I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen with exhaustion and fear. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, almost drowned out by the storm, a scraping like nails across stone, deliberate and patient. It didn't echo like a falling branch would, didn't rush like the wind. It came from deeper in the overhang, or maybe from somewhere outside, I couldn't tell. My pulse went wild. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The scraping continued, moving rhythmically, closer and then farther, like something was pacing me, watching. I considered crawling out into the storm, hoping to outrun it, but the snowstorm was a wall I couldn't break. Every few minutes, that sound would shift, then pause, waiting. The uncertainty was worse than any threat I could name. The shadows seemed to sense my panic. They no longer just moved, they began to respond. When I inched forward to peer out of the overhang, a long black smear stretched across the rock opposite, shaping itself like a crouched figure, then melting away when I blinked. Every time I tried to focus, the edges blurred, leaving only that lingering sense that I was not alone. And maybe the worst part was that I didn't see faces. Never faces, but I felt them, watching me, assessing me, waiting for something. I tried to keep my mind occupied, counting, whispering prayers, anything. But the blizzard outside and the darkness inside created a strange sense of time distortion. Minutes became hours, and hours became something else entirely, an endless loop of fear and cold. The more I stayed, the more the darkness felt like it was pressing into me, forcing my eyes to track the movements of the shadows, and the more I realized that some of them didn't just follow, they anticipated. A shadow would stretch before I moved, then recoil as though it had been waiting for me to shift. My stomach sank every time it happened, every time I felt my control slipping. Eventually, my body went numb. My fingers and toes were useless, my legs cramped and aching, but even then I couldn't sleep. Every time my eyes closed, I saw shapes moving just beyond the eyelids, as if my mind refused to shut down to protect me. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that these mountains were full of legends and stories, that locals whispered about feral people and lost wanderers who never came back. But that's all they were, stories. Yet, when I shifted slightly, a shadow would dart across my peripheral vision in a way no tree, no rock, no animal could. It was deliberate, patient, and intelligent. And there was a part of me, I hate to admit it, that felt relief when it vanished again, because the unknown was easier to face than the possibility of being watched. The storm eventually subsided, not with a rush, but slowly, almost politely, like the world was exhaling after holding its breath for days. I crawled out, the snow crunchy beneath my frozen hands, and took stock. That's when I saw the tracks. My own led into the overhang and back out again, but they weren't alone. Another set of footprints ran parallel to mine, deep and uneven, moving away from the rock in the direction I'd originally been heading. They weren't human, or if they were, whoever made them wasn't like any person I'd ever seen. The stride was wrong, the spacing inconsistent, almost as if it was a creature learning how to walk while it followed me. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the trees, the ridges, every shadow, every fold of snow, and there was nothing. Silence and the fading echo of the storm. I tried to convince myself to move, to put distance between myself and whatever had been out there, but every step felt heavy, hesitant. The forest seemed to close in again, even in daylight, the trees forming jagged silhouettes against the sky like silent sentinels. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a dark shape slip between the pines, or something crouched and patient, still following. It never came. but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had watched me leave, that it had waited long enough to make sure I survived the storm only to observe me stumble onward. Even now, days later, I feel it when I walk through deep woods, when the wind shifts just right, when a shadow flickers at the edge of my vision. My friends tell me it was just a storm, just exhaustion, just imagination. But I know what I saw. The Appalachian woods have a patience humans can't match. They don't just hide things, they wait. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to cross their path during a storm, they follow. Not to attack, maybe, but to watch, to mark, to make sure you remember that some places are not meant to be crossed alone. I can't explain what exactly followed me that night. I can't even tell if it was a person or something else. All I know is that it was deliberate, and the worst part is that the forest doesn't end, the mountains don't end, and the darkness doesn't either. I'll never forget the way it moved, the way it seemed to understand me in a way no human ever could. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the shadowed overhang, the way the black shapes stretched and darted in impossible ways. I hear the scraping again sometimes, faint but deliberate, like a reminder that it's still there, patient, waiting for the next storm, the next lost traveler. And I know deep down that one day I might not be alone. I left the mountains, but a part of me stayed behind in that overhang. A part of me that knows the shadows will always be there, silent, watching, waiting for the next fool who thinks they can outrun the mountains, or the things that live in them. Even as I sit here, miles away from that ridge, the memory of those tracks, the weight of that darkness, makes my skin crawl. And I know if the wind shifts just right tonight, if the snow falls in the right pattern, I'll see it again, not in person, but in my mind's eye, moving patiently, impossibly, deliberately, marking the spots where humans have no right to go. I can't say I'll ever forget, and I think that's what terrifies me the most. I remember the night I stumbled upon that cabin like it's burned into my memory, every detail seared into my mind. The storm had been relentless for hours, a whiteout that left the mountains looking like nothing more than jagged silhouettes fading into endless snow. I had been hiking earlier that day, chasing a narrow trail that disappeared more than it revealed, and by evening, the storm had swallowed everything around me. My boots were caked in ice, my jacket stiff from the cold, and my fingers felt like they'd turned to stone. Then, through the haze of blowing snow, I saw it. A small cabin, tucked between a slope of trees so thick it seemed like the forest itself was shielding it from the wind. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow. The chimney looked unused for years, and yet, somehow, it felt alive. The door was slightly ajar, and that little gap let out a thin wisp of smoke. Or maybe it was just the smell of wet wood. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted to be inside with whoever, or whatever, might have been there. But the cold was unbearable, and the wind howled in a way that made me feel like I was nothing but a target. I pushed the door slowly, the hinges groaning like a warning, and stepped inside. The warmth hit me immediately, subtle but unmistakable, like the cabin had been recently occupied. It wasn't a comfortable warmth, though. It had a cloying, too familiar feel, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I called out, my voice sounding small against the walls, and got nothing but silence in return. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost blending with the sound of the storm outside. I froze. It didn't sound like a voice I recognized. It was fragmented enough that I couldn't make out words, but it carried the cadence of someone speaking, debating, murmuring in low tones. My heart started hammering as I realized the sound was coming from the stairs leading to the loft. Each step groaned under my weight as I climbed, and the whispering grew louder, almost conversational now, though still incomprehensible. My flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls, and for a moment I caught glimpses of old furniture, a fireplace long cold, and tattered curtains that looked like they hadn't moved in decades. The room smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood, but beneath that, something else lingered. A metallic, almost acrid tang I couldn't place. I reached the top of the stairs, my breath coming in shallow bursts, and paused. The whispering was closer now, more deliberate, circling the room as if the voices were moving around me, not coming from a single source. I called out again, my voice shaking, and that's when I felt it. A deliberate, slow exhale behind me, warm and steady against the back of my neck. I spun, swinging my flashlight, and the beam landed on nothing. The shadows seemed to shift in response, but the room was empty. My chest tightened, and I realized the storm outside wasn't just a storm anymore. It was a barrier. The windows rattled violently with each gust, cutting me off from the world I knew. Out there, the world was white and chaotic, but in here, time seemed stretched, each second dragging endlessly as the whispering ticked up, pressing against my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind through the old beams, maybe my mind was playing tricks. But the sound of footsteps, bare, deliberate, echoed from the loft behind me, too measured to be the floor settling. I held my flashlight out in front, swaying it slowly, willing it to catch something, anything. The whispers turned into low, murmured tones that seemed to echo words I almost understood. Phrases like, "Don't leave," or "Stay here," though I wasn't certain. The room itself seemed to tighten, walls leaning in with a pressure I could feel on my chest. I could hear the snow piling against the cabin, the storm relentless, and the cold seeped through the floorboards, through the gaps in the walls, reminding me that I was alone, truly alone, yet not alone. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run down the stairs and out into the storm, but my legs refused to cooperate. Something rooted me there, staring into the shadows, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. My flashlight flickered again, and for the briefest instant, I thought I saw a figure in the corner, a hunched silhouette, pale and indistinct, just out of focus. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the whispering, growing louder, insistent. I could feel the eyes of the cabin, or whatever lived within it, on me, not aggressive, not violent, but deeply watchful, like it had been expecting me. The thought made my stomach twist. How long had it been waiting? Days, weeks, years? I couldn't tell. Hours passed like this. I tried to distract myself, inspecting the room, shining the flashlight into the corners, listening for the creaks that weren't from the house, but from something moving just beyond perception. The furniture was old, splintered. Some pieces coated in dust so thick it might have been decades since anyone had touched them. Yet the warmth remained, faint but real, as if the cabin itself breathed alongside me. I found a chair, its legs uneven, and sank down, hoping exhaustion would pull me under before the whispers drove me mad. But sleep was impossible. Every little sound, the shift of a floorboard, the groan of the roof under snow, the whispering from upstairs, kept me on edge. My mind started to play cruel tricks. A shadow stretching across the wall seemed to crouch closer with every glance, the whispers forming half words that almost coalesced into names I didn't recognize. At some point, I realized I wasn't alone in the room, or at least I wasn't alone in the house. A deliberate step on the floorboards behind me, slow and measured, froze my blood. I turned, expecting the same empty space, and found nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable, almost suffocating. My flashlight flickered again, casting the room in stark black and white shadows, and for the briefest instant, I thought I saw movement in the loft above, a figure retreating into darkness, careful, quiet, deliberate. It wasn't human, not entirely. Something about its posture, the way it moved, felt too calculated, too cautious, as if it knew the storm and the isolation were allies in its game. I spent the rest of the night sitting in that chair, my flashlight trained on the stairs, my ears straining to catch any pattern in the whispers. Every creak, every groan, every faint sigh made my heart leap. I tried to make sense of the voices, but the more I listened, the less sense it made. Sometimes I thought I heard laughter, hollow and echoing, and sometimes I thought I heard cries. But there were no words I could trust, no clues I could follow. Dawn became a blur of white and gray outside the window, and when the first light filtered into the cabin, the storm finally lessened enough that I could see the snow piled against the walls, pristine, untouched. I left as quietly as I could, retracing my steps through the mountains, glancing back only once to see the cabin standing there, unremarkable in the weak morning light. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the memory. The warmth, the whispers, the sense that the cabin had been alive in some way, waiting for me. I tell myself it was just isolation, hypothermia, or the storm playing tricks on my mind. But I know better. I remember the way the whispers shifted as I moved, the deliberate breaths behind me. The eyes I never saw but felt piercing through the darkness. I can still hear the faint murmur when the wind is right, carrying through the trees, and I wonder if the next person who finds that cabin will hear it too. Or if it's waiting, like it was for me, patient and deliberate, in the mountains where no one else dares to tread. I don't think I'll ever go back, but sometimes, when the wind is high and the night is long, I can't help thinking of that cabin. And I realize, with a sinking feeling, that the storm might not have ended. It might still be there, waiting for someone else to get lost. And if they do, I can't imagine how they'll explain the whispers, the deliberate breathing, the warmth that shouldn't exist in a dead cabin, or the sense of being watched by something that doesn't need eyes. All I know is, I never felt truly alone again after that night, and that's a fear that doesn't fade with sunlight. I remember the morning had started like any other winter hike, the kind where you think you know these mountains like the back of your hand. I'd been following a trail I'd walked countless times before, convinced that familiarity would keep me safe. The wind was light then, playful even, rattling the bare branches of the oaks and maples as I stepped carefully over frozen roots. By noon, though, the sky had turned leaden, and what had been a gentle dusting of snow quickly became a whiteout. At first, I thought I could push through. These trails were familiar, after all. But the storm came fast, burying every marker, every landmark I depended on. A tree I knew well from a bend in the path was now just another hulking silhouette, twisted in a way that made it almost unrecognizable. The familiar had become alien. I kept thinking I saw movement, subtle at first, a shadow sliding between the trees at the periphery of my vision. Every time I turned to confirm, there was nothing. No one. Just the storm roaring around me, snowflakes stabbing at my face like tiny shards of glass. My mind started to play tricks, every sound warped into something threatening. Branches cracking in the distance became footsteps. The groan of the wind sounded like voices whispering from just beyond reach. The snow, relentless and unyielding, distorted everything: depth, distance, direction. I realized then that I didn't know which way was forward or back. The trail I had followed for years was gone, erased, as if the storm itself had swallowed it whole. Panic came quickly, uninvited. I tried to retrace my steps, but every turn led only to more snow, more trees that looked the same. I began calling out, my voice swallowed instantly by the storm, returning to me muffled and alien. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time had no meaning in that whiteness, and the cold began to settle into my bones, deep and insidious. My breathing came in ragged bursts, and I realized I wasn't just lost. I was utterly alone, abandoned to the forest and the wind. The isolation pressed down on me, a physical weight that made each step feel like wading through lead. At some point, I stumbled across what I thought was a small cabin, half buried under a drift's weight. Relief hit me like a wave, though it was tempered by the cabin's odd appearance. Its windows were frosted over, the door hanging loosely on one hinge, and there was a strange, almost sour smell in the air when I pushed inside. The floorboards creaked under my weight, echoing too loudly, and the walls seemed impossibly close, trapping me in the silence of the storm outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the first to find refuge here, or that the cabin hadn't been waiting for me at all, but rather I had stumbled into something that didn't belong to anyone anymore. I spent what felt like hours, crouched by a makeshift fire I managed to coax from dry kindling, listening. The wind howled against the cabin, carrying faint, unidentifiable noises. A soft scraping, like claws against wood, came from somewhere outside. My stomach tightened, and I thought of turning the stove on full blast, lighting candles, making a commotion, but every instinct told me to stay silent, to let the storm shield me and not invite attention. I don't know what I was afraid of exactly, only that it felt like something had been following me for hours, always just at the edge of the trees, observing, waiting for a mistake. Sleep came, or something like it, but it was shallow, broken by strange sounds. Faint tapping on the walls, a soft, dragging shuffle across the snow, a whisper I thought I recognized as my own name. I would jerk awake, heart hammering, to see the cabin empty except for shadows dancing in the firelight. My rational mind tried to explain it. The storm, exhaustion, isolation. But when the morning light came weakly through the frost-covered windows, I saw tracks leading to the cabin that weren't mine. Deep, wide prints that disappeared back into the snow as though whatever had left them had melted into the storm. I left the cabin at first light, hoping the trail would reappear, hoping for some small sign of civilization. But the snow had shifted again overnight, burying all memory of the path. Trees loomed around me, gnarled and bending, shapes twisting in ways that seemed almost deliberate. I stumbled for hours, every step sinking into the heavy, unrelenting drifts, my mind becoming a mess of fear and exhaustion. Occasionally, I would think I saw movement again, shadows darting just beyond my vision, sometimes crouched low like a person, sometimes moving too fast to be human. My pulse would spike and I would lurch away, only to find the space empty when I dared to look. By late afternoon, I was weak, numb, and my limbs were nearly useless from the cold. I thought of lying down, letting the snow claim me, but some stubborn, irrational part of me kept going. I forced myself to climb over a ridge, to push through a thicket, until finally, hours later, the storm relented just enough to reveal a faint road. A truck had passed, leaving tire tracks partially filled with snow. I followed them, stumbling, shouting for anyone, anything, until I reached the safety of a clearing where I could finally see the valley below. Relief was immediate, but hollow. The forest behind me seemed larger, stranger, as if it had reshaped itself during the storm, hiding some secret it had been guarding all along. Even now, years later, snowstorms make my chest tighten. I can close my eyes and feel the wind tearing at my coat, hear the distorted groan of the trees, the subtle shuffle of something following just beyond sight. I've tried to explain it to friends, to laugh it off, but I can't. The trail vanished in a way that logic cannot explain, leaving only a memory that lingers like frost under the skin. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I hear a scraping, just beyond the edge of the tree line, and I know that whatever followed me, or whatever I glimpsed in those shifting shadows, is still out there, waiting for the next storm to cover the world in white. That day in the mountains changed something inside me. I'd always trusted my senses, my knowledge of the land, but that storm taught me that familiarity is fragile. That what you think you know can vanish in an instant, leaving you exposed, stripped of certainty. The fear I felt wasn't just about getting lost. It was the realization that the mountains themselves could hold you, watch you, and let you go only when they decided. I've hiked the Appalachians countless times since, and every snow-laden trail, every bending tree brings a memory of that day. The whiteout, the shifting shadows, the untraceable footsteps in the snow. It isn't just the storm I fear now. It's what might have been moving in it, something patient, something that waits for the snow to hide it. I tell myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, the wind and the cold playing tricks. But sometimes, when the wind moans through the valley, when the snow drifts in sudden, impossible heights, I remember the trail that vanished, and I feel the weight of eyes on me again. Not the eyes of an animal, not of another hiker, but of something that knows the forest better than I ever could. Something that walks unseen and waits. And I know, without a shred of doubt, that those mountains didn't let me leave. They allowed it. I still carry the memory with me, in the way I step cautiously through snow, in the way I listen to the wind, in the way I hesitate when the forest seems too quiet. Every storm reminds me that the line between safe and lost is thinner than we think, and that sometimes the trail you know so well can disappear, leaving only the echo of fear behind. The mountains didn't just challenge me, they changed me. And in the quiet moments of snowfall, I feel the same dread creeping in, whispering that the forest hasn't forgotten me, and that the next time it's white with snow, the trail might vanish for good.